Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome back to Introduction to English Literature. It's been a long time since the last time we had a lecture. We actually stopped for a break to celebrate the last days of Ramadan and the Eid, but then the Israeli occupation had another opinion, and they decided to cancel our Eid and our celebrations with their aggression. But again, I'm really glad that we, in a way, survived, and we're here back again doing what we always do, reading poetry and doing literature. And this is, in a way, a form of resistance. So, Alhamdulillah, Assalamualaikum, everyone. And I would just say a couple of things before we start our lecture. First of all, I want to remind you that if any of you, um, because like I know that all of us we suffer more problems now with electricity, with the internet, with everything. So I know this, and I have it in mind. So I will go easy on you. We decided to go easy on you. And this is important. But also, if any one of you have something more, if any one of you, uh, I hope no one, but if any one lost their house, la samahullah, or have any problem, please don't hesitate to contact me and tell me about it. Okay, and we'll try always to find a solution. This is one. Two, you had a quiz, a second quiz. It was supposed to be this week, but we decided to cancel it, and we will give every one of you 10 marks. The 10 marks. مش هنحسبه على الكويز الأول أو شيء، لا. Everyone will get the 10 marks. يعني عادية ولا حلاية الصمود وبسالة المقاومة والناس. The resilience of the Palestinian people everywhere in Jerusalem, in Lid, in Gaza, here and there. Okay? So I hope this will be a good news for you. But I don't hope that I hope that this will not spoil you and make you forget about studying, because we'll have a final exam in a couple of weeks. It's actually like in 20 days. You'll start your final exam, so you should take this seriously and start studying more and more. Um, what else? Yes, this lecture, we have 4 lectures now. Today's lecture, and then another lecture this Wednesday, and then 2 lectures for the next week, and that's it. We will be done with our course. Okay. And I guess that's it. If you have any other question, we might have a Zoom, a live meeting, or just you can ask me on Facebook or on the group. Don't send me messages because I don't check my messenger regularly. Okay. If you have any question, I'll answer you. Post it on the group in the comments, and then I'll answer you, inshallah. Okay. So today we'll talk about the Shelley's. We'll continue with the romantic poets, and today short story writers and novelists. Um, I'm not sure if you still remember where we stopped last time. We stopped with Byron and Keats and Coleridge. Before them, we studied Wordsworth and Blake, the Romantics, right? Remember? I hope you do remember. Okay. So I have a question for you before we start, an opening question as always. Do you think that there's a relationship between poetry and revolutions? And what is the relationship between them? We'll talk more about this today with Percy Shelley. أنا آسف إني قاعد أمرجحه وبهزهز بس يعني ما فيش مكان تاني. We'll talk more about this, the relationship between poetry and revolutions with Percy Shelley again. Um, but like, do you think there's a relationship? Because I think there is a relationship. Is it that when the revolutions start, poets start writing about them and explaining them, or is it that poets write poetry and incite and start these revolutions? Um, what do you think? Think about this. Think about this relationship between, because it's interesting, the relationship between poetry. Why do the oppressors, the dictators, uh, why do they always imprison poets, and why do they always uh, fight poets? Like, the Israeli occupation imprisoned our friend Darine Tatur from uh, the I'm not really sure where she's from. I guess Lid or somewhere inside the green light. She was imprisoned by the Israeli occupation a few years ago just because she wrote poetry. They killed Hassan Kanafani. They killed Najil Ali for drawing caricature, right? And they've killed so many other poets and authors. So again, what's the relationship between poets and poetry in general and revolutions? Today we'll start with a revolutionary poet, Percy Shelley, and his defense of poetry. Then we'll move to his wife, Mary Shelley, and then we'll end with post-romantic, pre-Victorian, uh, very important author Jane Austen. Starting with Percy Shelley. Percy Shelley was one and maybe the most important figure of the second generation of romantic poets, because again we have the first generation, the pre-romantic Blake, then the fathers of romantic, the English romantic literature, Wordsworth and Coleridge, and then we have, again as we said last time, the second generation, the youth. We have Keats, who died very young, and we have Lord Byron, and we have Percy Shelley. Now, Shelley and Keats, they were friends, they were close, and this is why Shelley was deeply affected by the untimely death of Keats. And we talked about this, how dying at a young age gave Keats even more importance and gave him this very important picture, or this very romantic picture, dying at the very young, and already publishing and writing so many texts that were very successful before and after his death. And I remember connecting this with Basil Al-Araj, who also died very young, and then he martyred because he was in an encounter with Israeli occupation forces. They killed him, and then after his death, even his words and his writings and his articles became even more important, because dying at very young age always gives people this um, romantic image. And by the way, Percy Shelley also died at a very young age as well. Um, but before that, when his friend Keats died, he was really sad. He wrote this elegy, Adonis, a very uh, long text, Adonis, not very long, but a long text, Adonis, elegizing Keats. It starts, I weep for Adonis, he is dead. Oh, weep for Adonis. Weep, like cry, weep. Jesus wept, right? I weep for, crying with sadness. I weep for Adonis, he is dead. And see how strong this short sentence, he is dead. Percy Shelley was really famous, really known for these short, strong sentences. He is dead. We'll talk more about this in the upcoming uh, texts by Percy Shelley. Um, Now, but before we move, again, Shelley and his friend Keats were very similar in so many ways, Most importantly, because both of them always wanted to capture the deep personal experience. The journey uh, for finding meaning. We talked about this when we discussed Keats. Um, and Chile also was in had always expressed his personal experience finding the meaning and exploring himself. But still, Percy Shelley was also similar to Blake in another sense because both of them were political. And this is a good question for your exams. I could ask you about the similarities between Keats and Percy Shelley, or the similarities between Blake and Percy Shelley. Because like I could ask you in a true or false question. Uh, Shelley's poetry is like Keats' poetry because both of them were more political, which is not correct. The similarity is that both of them wanted to try to capture the deep personal experiences, okay, and vice versa. Uh, as I mentioned before, Shelley was a rebel, was a revolutionist. And whenever you think about Chile, you always remember the revolutionist Chile. You always remember Chile who fought, who attacked society, who attacked the religion of his age, and which is not easy to attack religion and society, right? Because everyone will hate you, or most, especially the institution, will hate you, and then you will find difficulties in getting money and sponsors but still, Shelley was again a rebel, a revolutionist. In his text, The Queen Map, he attacked religion and society. Another text for him, The Mask of Anarchy. The Mask of Anarchy, he called for a revolution. This was in response to the Manchester massacre. Manchester, where Manchester United and Manchester City come from, a city in England. Um, in 1819, there was a massacre. There were protests there. People protested against the authorities, and then the soldiers killed the protesters, as you can see in this illustration. Um, and during that time, he wrote this text, The Mask of Anarchy, but it was published years after that for some reason. And in this text, he calls for two things: for freedoms and for social and political reforms. And this is very important. Let me take a minute here because there are two struggles usually: a struggle for the freedom of the individual, the human rights for the people, for the individuals, which is very important. But there is the bigger struggle, the struggle for the bigger reform, the social and the political reform. And a very important point here is that some people make the struggle for the individual freedom, put it in front, or make it a priority rather than the bigger struggle, which is not good. Uh, because like here in Palestine, our main struggle is the struggle against the occupation, the settler colonialism, against Israel. Uh, and the other struggles for the individual freedoms, for the human rights, are important, but not as important. They are part of the bigger struggle, and this is what Chile called for. Uh, so whenever you talk about the Manchester massacre, you, always people will always remember Shelley's words uh, in The Mask of Anarchy. Um, and always, when you think about again the relationship between the revolutions and poetry, um, you think of for example, Tamim Barghouthi. Um, whenever you mention the same way, whenever you mention the revolution in Egypt of 2011, 25 يناير, you always remember يا مصري هانت وبانت, right, by Tamim Barghouthi. And here in Palestine, especially here in Palestine, there's a separate school of poets and writers called by Ghassan Kanafani, another Palestinian author, called the school of the poets of resistance, or the resistance poets, شعراء المقاومة. Uh, so we always got, especially us, the Palestinians, we know this, that revolution is connected to poetry. So this also comes with Percy Shelley. Let's read these lines from the Mask of Anarchy. Rise like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number. Shake you chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few. This is the, the most important line of all. You are many, they are few. I'm pretty sure there's a line by Tim Barghouti which is similar to this line, but I'm trying, like, since I started preparing for this lecture, I'm trying to remember this line and I cannot find it. So if any one of you can find me the line that says something similar by Tim Barghouti, please send it to me, and you will get a bonus mark for it. Okay, so he's talking to the masses, to the people. You are many, you're so many, you're millions, and they're few. Even if they have weapons, if they have arms, but they're few. You are many, you can beat them. Um, uh, so rise like lions after slumber. This is simile. Rise like lions, because we have the word like. It makes it a simile. Rise like lions after slumber. Slumber is like sleep, uh, in unvanquishable number, because the number is important. In all the revolutions, the number is always important. So rise in unvanquishable number. Shake you chains to earth like dew. This reminds us of another romantic poet, Abu al-Qasim al-Shabi, and his famous line, وَلَا بُدَّ لِلْقَيْدِ أَنْ يَنْكَسِرْ. Right? The same message. Shake you chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen. Ye are many, they are few. Okay? Very strong text by Percy Shelley, by our friend Percy Shelley. Another important text by Percy Shelley is Ode to the West Wind. And again, this brings us back to the nature and the wind, the natural elements in the romantic poetry. So here, the wind is a symbol of, uh, because also symbolism is always connected to romantic poets, is a symbol of power and the change. Because Percy was fascinated by the idea of the cycle of nature, how everything in nature starts and ends at the same point every time, all the time. We studied this in school, probably, how the water is like, there's a cycle of water. So every drop of water starts and ends in the same way all the time. Goes to the sea, and then up to the clouds, and then rain, and then again to the sea, etc., etc. And everything in nature has the same, in a way, the same system, the same cycle. Because again, we have the trees, they have the leaves. The leaves fall with the help of the wind, and then they spread the seeds everywhere, and then in the next spring they grow again. And this is life, this is nature. And he was fascinated by this, how the wind it blows away the old life and spreads the seeds to create a new life. And this for him is freedom, is true freedom. And he wanted the wind to shake him and lift him the same way it does to the leaves, to the dead leaves. But then he realized it doesn't. He wanted the wind, the nature, to help him the same way. He wanted the wind to help him the same way it helps the leaves, the trees. Because he says, I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed. And again, see, I bleed. A very strong, very short sentence. And its strength is from the shortness of it. Brevity is the soul of wit again, says Shakespeare. And this is another metaphor. I fall upon the thorns of life, as life has thorns. Okay, but because we don't have the word as or like, it's a metaphor, not a simile. I fall upon the thorns of life, I plead. And this again is how Percy Shelley exposes his own feelings at the center of the poem. So yes, it's about nature. It's about the wind. The west wind is the wind of autumn. Again, he's talking about nature. He's talking about the natural elements, the trees, the seeds, everything. But then somewhere you find him. You find his own feelings, his own experience there in the poem. And this again is a romantic feature. Now, you will study Percy Shelley more in detail in the romantic literature course and in the poetry course, and you will notice how he had some anti-romantic features. By the way, not always romantic features. He was critical of the school itself, but still, you can always find these very important romantic features: the nature, the individual feelings of the poet. Let's read some more lines from Percy's Ode to the West Wind. Drive my dead thoughts over the universe. He's talking to the wind, like withered leaves to quicken a new birth. So, like, the leaves, the dead leaves on the trees, the wind helps them bring a new birth when he spreads the seeds. So he says he's asking the wind to drive his dead thoughts over the universe. And by the incantation of this verse, by singing this verse, and by the incantation of this verse, scatter as from an unextinguished hearth, ashes and sparks, my words among mankind. So scatter my words among mankind. He's asking the wind to to spread his words. So because again, when we speak, we use the wind, right? Because uh, it helps us, right? When I say something, the winds make it reach uh, uh, as far as possible. So he's asking the wind to help him. Okay, you cannot leave me, you cannot lift me, but at least you can spread my word. Be through my lips to unawakened earth. So be through my lips to unawakened earth the trumpet of a prophecy. So be a trumpet, the trumpet of a prophecy. You know the trumpet um, of a prophecy. What's a prophecy? Oh, when if winter comes, can spring be far behind? Because the west wind is the wind of autumn, and then we have winter, and then we have spring, and spring is a symbol of rebirth. So yes, the west wind shakes the dead leaves, and then we have winter with all the horrible things that happen at winter, especially for the English people. For us, it's heaven, but for them it's not. And then we have spring, uh, that comes afterwards. Okay, so this is Ode to the West Wind by Percy Shelley. Percy Shelley was also an essayist and a critic, not only a poet, and he wrote a very important text, The Defense of Poetry, an essay where he says, where he argues that poetry can reform the world. Poetry can change the world. And this is my idea that I always keep repeating for you. Poetry can change. Poetry can be a source of change. And this brings us to the question that I started the lecture with. What's the relationship between poetry and revolution? For Percy Shelley, poetry is a means of change. Poetry can reform, can change the world to the better. Now, Percy Shelley, after reading his essays and his poetry, you can get this idea that he's a pessimist. But he was also an optimist, as we can call him a piso optimist. as our friend Emil Habibi called al-mutashail. He's not completely optimist, not completely pessimist, somewhere in between. Some people might call it realistic, positive realistic, in a way, not dreaming, not romantic, in a negative way, but also not very dark, somewhere in between. Because he believed that the world is corrupt, there are so many problems, but there's always hope for change, for a better life, for a better society. And this is why he was not an escapist. Unlike Wordsworth. Wordsworth was a talented poet, but he was an escapist. What did he do? He flee to the countryside. He was alone in the nature and wrote poetry about daffodils, about rainbows, but then he changed nothing in the society because maybe he lost hope. But for Persephone, no, he always tried to reform, to change for the better. Um, so yes, he condemns the corruption and how the rich always become richer and the poor always become poorer, but still he uh, asked for change. And for him, change starts with poetry. Why? Because for him, as he states in the defense of poetry, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. The poets are the legislators of the world. You know, we have in Palestine the what is it called? المجلس التشريعي, the legislative, I guess, council. So again, they are like the parliament, the parliament members, the poets, but they are unacknowledged. People do not vote for them. They are not elected, but still they tell people what to do. In a way, everything starts in poetry. Every change in society starts in poetry, and then it becomes a revolution, and then at the end of the day, the elected legislators will make it kind of a law or something. So it always starts with the poets, with the poetry. At least this is how Percy Shelley um, put it. Okay. So for a conclusion, um, the Romantics were poets of change, especially the second generation of Romantic poets. Um, but they also, what made them especially different, uh, especially unique, is that they found, they always talked about nature and about beauty, about art, um, and how they also uh, they did not ignore the corruption. Yes, they talked about the beauty, but did not ignore the corruption. Remember Coleridge, how he talked about uh, killing nature, not obeying nature, killing the albatross. Remember Blake before him, how he talked about the tiger and the worm in the sick crows. And this also goes to Percy Shelley and to Byron and all the second generation poets. So yes, they talked about beauty, talked about nature, but also discussed the this personalization of people, the dangers in the modern world, especially after the Industrial Revolution. And as we always mention and remind you that individuality was a major theme, was a major characteristic in their poetry, and this gives a conclusion to the Romantic poets. Now we'll go to the Romantic writers. Not sure if we can call them romantics, because there's a debate about this. But at least they wrote their their texts the era of the romantic during the romantic period. Um, okay, and the prose, the nature of the prose changed rapidly, developed in that period, because we said that it started in the Augustan age. People started writing novels, but it was still, it was still beginning, so it was not really developed. But it changed quickly at that time. We'll start with two important novelists. Both of them are women because in novels, someone might claim that women are more successful than men. I don't know what do you think, but some people argue about this. We talk about Mary Shelley and Jane Austen. Mary Shelley is the wife of Percy Shelley. Um, but she was not only the wife of Percy Shelley, she was the Mary Shelley, the writer of Frankenstein. Maybe you can say that Percy Shelley was the husband of Mary Shelley. So she took his name, and this is why she's Mary Shelley, but originally she was Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary, and this is why her full name is Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. You can. There's a movie in Netflix, very recent one, 2019, I guess, called Mary Shelley. It's about the life of the couple, Mary and Percy Shelley. You might watch it if you are interested. It's not that literary. It's more into their lives, their ideas, and how they met each other. But yeah, you still can watch it if you are interested. So Mary Shelley was a short story writer and an essayist, and we can say a novelist regarding Frankenstein or the modern uh, Prometheus. Prometheus. Now, Frankenstein is the first of its kind novel. It's a gothic novel. What's a gothic novel? A gothic novel is a frightening novel in a way. The horror movie. We have the gothic novel about frightening things that happen in mysterious old buildings or somewhere that's very scary, lonely places. Um, when you read it, you're always worried that something will happen, somebody will be killed, blood will be there, here or there, or something. Okay, and this is Frankenstein. Um, Now, Frankenstein is about an extraordinary world, and again, this is a romantic feature. The extraordinary, the supernatural, in which there's a scientist called Frankenstein. So Frankenstein is the name of the scientist. So many people mistake this and think that Frankenstein is the name of the monster, the creature that the scientist created. But Frankenstein is the name of the scientist. His name is Victor Frankenstein, and he creates he collects the dead parts from different people to create a perfect man, in a way, a perfect human. And he, in a way, using electricity, he gave him life. So he created, in a way, the monster. Okay, by collecting dead body parts from different people. Uh, but then when he succeeded in giving him life, in creating him, he was Victor got afraid and lost control, or he was afraid that he will lose control. So he abandoned his creation, the monster that he was not still a monster, but later he became monster, and he took revenge. He killed Victor's brother, he killed Victor's wife, and then he killed Victor himself. And before that, he killed a random guy over somewhere. Okay. Um, so it's a very long story. You can read about it, or maybe you can read it in the summer break. But what's important here is the form, the structure of the novel, which was very new. Mary was experimenting while writing, and there's a funny story, not funny but interesting story about writing the novel. You can also check it out. Okay, we don't have time, but it's really interesting how she wrote it, how the first idea came to Mary Shelley. Okay, at the end of the novel, uh, we the readers come face to face. We talk, or the monster talks to us. and we discover the human aspect, or at least we can really understand the whole story from his point of view. And again, like her husband, uh, the novel, her writing has romantic and anti-romantic features. Um, because again, it shows the romantic interest in supernatural. Remember Coleridge, remember Keats, um, but it also shows the attempts of man to be as powerful as God, and this is what the romantics, in a way, because this is, not know if we can say it's an allegory of the creation of man, in a way. Um, of course, we can say this, but I don't want to spoil it for you. You can read it for yourself and decide. But it shows how man is not as great as he thinks he is. We humans are limited, not as we think we are, in a way. Okay. Uh, Frankenstein is also, because yeah, it's a gothic novel, but it's also a sci-fi. You know what's a sci-fi? A science fiction novel. There are now so many sci-fi movies. A lot of them are based on sci-fi novels, science fiction. What's a science fiction text? It's a story about events, usually in the future, which are affected by imaginary developments in science. For example, traveling to other planets where there's life on them, or inventing the new stuff, like in 1984 by George Orwell. He not sure if we can say it's, yeah, it's science fiction novel, because he expected, or he imagined that the governments will start spying on people in their houses, and this what happened years a few decades after his death, after his novel. So and this, so many people are crazy about there's so many novels that talked about, expected that science will reach to, will reach somewhere, and then science actually reached there years after that. But so far, science did not reach this extent. We still cannot and might never really create people, give them life. Okay. So this is again science fiction. So Frankenstein is both a gothic novel and a science fiction novel. Okay, and this might be also a question for you in the exams. Let's finish with Jane Austen. Jane Austen, and again, she's not completely romantic, but um, it's important to study her in the romantic context, because she was not also a Victorian, completely Victorian. She was somewhere in between. Um, okay, but she was completely different from the other writers of her time, and she really started the Victorian literature era in her own way. She was interested in society, in the moral, in the social, and in the psychological behavior of her characters, um, which is always a reflection of the real society. Um, all of her novels are centered around young heroines who start innocent in a way and then grow up searching for their personal happiness. And we'll see examples about this in a bit. Now, for Austen, in her novels, the picture is always detailed. When you read something, you always can imagine the very small details everywhere. Uh, Also, the pictures are often ironic. There's this sense of irony in her writings, and the number of people are always small because she gives so many details for everyone. So the number of people is always small. Um, and uh, Austen always gives her characters choices. Okay, And then she shows how and why these characters make these choices. So we follow their journey with choosing, and then deciding, choosing, and then um, how and why, and then what happens after. Um, uh, One of her important novels, Sense and Sensibility, written in or published in 1811, 1811, which contrasts between two sisters, Eleanor and Marine. Eleanor is tense. She's rational, she's self-controlled, self-aware, so she's sense. And Marine or Marianne is the sensibility because she's rather emotional, more emotional than her sister. And in a way, so many people read this as a contrast between the Romantic and the Augustan ages, because the Augustan age was the age of sense, of reason, while the Romantic age was the age of emotion, right? Of feelings. And this is why it's important to read her in the Romantic context as a post-Romantic novelist. Uh, so it's also interesting to read her novel about these two sisters as a contrast between two literary schools, the Romantic and the Augustan schools. Okay. Now, other important novels by her, we have Emma, we have Mansfield Park, and we have Pride and Prejudice. All of them, by the way, the four of them, Sense and Sensibility, Emma, Mansfield Park, and Pride and Prejudice, all of them were adopted into movies, very successful movies, and not one like Pride and Prejudice. I don't know. We have two movies. Emma, we have two, I guess, or three Hollywood movies. One of them is like 2019, uh, very um, uh, very recent one. Sense and Sensibility also. There's a movie, and also Mansfield Park. I'm not sure, one or two movies. Her novels were very successful, and the movies based on them are also very successful and very interesting movies. And again, it's very easy in a way to make a movie based on her novels because she gives you everything in detail. You can imagine it while reading it. Um, and unexpectedly, um, some people might argue that, for example, Pride and Prejudice, the movie is as good as the novel, and this is not something common in the readers' societies, because readers are always more obsessed about the books. Because a movie always picks one side of the story, one perspective, and you hate it because you imagine the character in a certain way, and the movie cannot cover everything. But Pride and Prejudice is a masterpiece, both the movie and the novel. Now, in these three novels, she shows that uh, every character, every young heroine um, should know herself, and every man as well. But especially, she focuses on the young heroines, the women. Uh, Everyone should know herself in order to make the right choices in love and marriage. So you first, because like the first advice always is to get to know the person you're marrying, but what's more important is to know yourself first. Okay. um One important feature about her novels is that they always end happily ever after. um and this, again, as I mentioned before, is because she wants to sell, and people love it when their heroes and heroines uh, are happy. So this was partially because people, the audience, wanted this, and we said how they um, affected the writers, but also because this is the message she was sending, that you should choose correct to be as happy as my heroines, my heroes. But still, it ends happily, but it makes you think or rethink the way you think about life, about society, about the morals, and everything. Um, so this is from I guess Pride and Prejudice. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in position of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. And this is always like the story is always like this. There's a man, very rich man, and girls. All the girls want to marry him except one girl. She doesn't care about him. She doesn't want to marry him. She hates him, but he loves her and he wants to marry her. And then they both realize that they love each other, and then they get married at the end of the day. It's always like this. So in Pride and Prejudice, again, a very beautiful novel. Elizabeth, the heroine, Elizabeth Bennet, which is again hates Mr. Darcy. Darcy is the wealthy man in want of a wife. She hates him for some reason, which is called prejudice. And he has pride. He's proud. He doesn't want to explain himself or to tell her that uh, she misjudged him. So we have prejudice. Prejudice, um, prejudgment. You know, when you judge someone before you really get to know them, and we have pride, and this is why you have pride and prejudice. His pride and her prejudice, and then both of them explore themselves, know more about themselves, and then they reach self awareness, and then the happy ending with their marriage at the end of the day. Um, Now, the 2005 movie, um, starring Keira Knightley, is a very fascinating movie. Very fascinating. Everything, the scenes, the nature, um, I really like Keira Knightley. Um, the, um, the the language and her accent is also unique. But if this no, movie is a masterpiece. If you haphazardly, randomly stop the movie at any moment and took a screenshot, you have a masterpiece. It's a very fascinating movie. You can also watch it. Okay, and with that, we end today's lecture. For the discussion, um, you don't have to answer this time, but it's good to do. Okay, I'll post the discussion, but I want to close the comment section. Okay, the romantic poets. Some people claim that romantic poets changed literature forever. Do you agree with that or not? Do you agree that the romantic poets, with their poetry, changing poetry for the first time from the great, from the sacred, to the personal, to the very uh, trivial in a way. Uh, does this change literature? How unique were they? How different were they? How modernist were they? Okay, so what do you think? Do you agree that they changed literature forever? You maybe don't want to judge now. Maybe after you read more. But so far, what do you think? Uh, okay. I also want to remind you to read the last article I wrote for the Electric Intifada, using your voices about romantic literature, reading Wordsworth during the time of war and aggression on Gaza. Okay, thank you everyone for listening and for watching, and see you the next time with the Victorian literature. Goodbye.